Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of Cabinet on the 15th of December 2022. I'll start with apologies for absence first, please.
I have an apology from Councillor Alison Pugh.
Okay, and any others? None? Okay, we'll move on to disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Any to declare today? Don't see any hands.
Yeah, sorry, Leader. Item 7, the local authority governor appointments.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. On then to the minutes of the previous meetings, pages 1 to 6. I've not been advised of any amendments, but happy to take any if there are. If not, I'll move them as a true record. Could I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. All those in favour, if you could show using your real hand, that's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, that's carried. On to announcements of Leader of the Council. Just to refer that we have now had the settlement from the Welsh Government. And whilst it's very welcome in that it adds to the money that we believed was a consequential from UK government, so it's the allocation for local government is above what we had anticipated in terms of potential additional monies. It still remains significantly short of the pressures that are faced by councils and services across Wales. The energy pressures in Wales, just in local government, remain at over 200 million. The energy pressures in the health service remain at over 260 million. That's without wage and general inflation. So whilst this money is welcome and will certainly assist in us being able to bolster resources in key services, it will still leave difficult decisions for this and other councils across Wales. So I'm sure we'll revisit that as we come back to the budget next week. On then to public question time. Are there any members of the public who submitted questions?
None.
Okay. Councillor question time. I don't see any councillors present for questions. Okay. We'll move on to item 7 then, which is local authority governor appointments. Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Can I formally move the report and thank the people that have come forward to act as school governors?
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to second the report. Could you all, if there isn't any questions or comments for Councillor Smith, if I could ask you all to show if you're in favour of the recommendations. Thank you very much. That's carried. The next report, if we can, please, I would like to bring forward the Swansea Council Net Zero report, because I know a couple of members need to get away to another meeting. So if I can bring with Cabinet's approval item 10 forward, please, as the next item. So Councillor Lewis, over to you.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for bringing the report forward. I'll try and be brief. Clearly, this report with the Council reaching net zero touches on every single Cabinet portfolio and service and department. Since the last report in November 2021, the Council has submitted 3 years of emissions data under the new Welsh Government Welsh Net Zero reporting guidelines for public sector bodies. The aim is for us to progress towards a carbon neutral public sector by 2030. And it's worth noting that there are 60 public bodies reporting in this manner to Welsh Government. The emissions reporting is laid out in section 2 of the report, our journey to net zero. And I would like to highlight all the good work, and I'm sure other Cabinet members would like to respond to that. We've been on this journey for quite a number of years. This is not something that is new for us as a council, and this action plan and report aims to build upon the good work that we've been doing, particularly since we came in as an administration, I have to add. And so in 2.2, it highlights the 6 emissions categories. I won't go to those in detail. I know Cabinet members have had this report in advance. And 2.3 highlights scope 1 and 2 and scope 3. In item 3, you'll see Swansea's carbon footprint. That is our current emissions over the past 3 years. This is the information that we've submitted to Welsh Government. And item 4 highlights the proposed delivery plan. And then just to add something which I feel is important to highlight, particularly with this report, item 9, the financial implications. Clearly, for us as a local authority to have to reach net zero, this will not come as at a cheap cost. It's going to cost quite a number of millions for us to reach net zero. This is money that we do not have as a council and as an authority, and we will be heavily reliant on Welsh Government funding and resource if we have any chance of reaching that target. So I feel that, you know, that needs to be, I can't say that strongly enough, Leader. And so at Appendix 1, you'll see the Swansea Council's net zero delivery plan for 2030. And so I'll go back to the recommendations and move the report that recommended that Cabinet approves the proposed Swansea Council net zero 2030 delivery plan as attached at Appendix 1, and that acknowledges the continuing work on nature recovery and Swansea Net Zero 2050 programmes, which will require separate reports to Cabinet at a future date. And I'm sure Councillor Hopkins will elaborate on that more when it comes to the nature recovery biodiversity report that we have later on the agenda. Thank you, Leader. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I'm happy to formally second this one, and obviously just make the point that you alluded to as well, which is this is a very, very clear plan to get us to 2030 and will require a whole council approach to get us there. However, much of what we would want to do, not just for this report in 2030, but for 2050, will require a commitment and funding from Welsh Government and UK Government to make the necessary resources available across a wide range of services in order for that to be delivered, because this is of a scale that cannot be delivered with council resources or local taxpayer resources alone. It is a very much needed set of changes if we are to protect the climate and protect the planet for future generations, but that will require governmental level interventions. So I will now open it up to other Cabinet members. Councillor Francis Davis.
Yeah, I'd like to thank Councillor Andrew Lewis for the work she put into this. But as she says, it is everybody's job to make sure that this gets delivered. You know, we have been instructed by Welsh Government on the importance of this, and I think it's not fallen on deaf ears with us in Swansea to do our part. But this does need resources to make sure it's all well and good moving legislation, but unless it's followed up with the finances to deliver, it can, you know, sound a bit meaningless. But it's also the private sector's job. I know this report is what we as a local authority, and I was wondering, Leader, the Blue Eden project, how much will this contribute to Swansea being sort of carbon neutral in the future? Or not just Swansea, but the region, because I think that's a very important project that I would hope that, you know, and especially the private sector doing it, and the importance of that project, not just to Swansea, but all of Wales.
Thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. I mean, in terms of net zero 2030 and the council, I mean, Councillor Lewis has made the point in other meetings that of course, we're already using 100% green energy in terms of council operations anyway. So in that respect, you know, we have made a significant change already. In terms of Blue Eden, though, it remains a huge opportunity for the city and the region to avail itself of renewable energy that is competitive in price and certainly would be now given energy costs. But also when the final details of the scheme are announced in due course, I'm sure people will be hugely impressed with the potential direct impacts for homes and businesses in Swansea from energy generated in the lagoon. And of course, as with previous proposals for lagoons, we know that it's different to other forms of renewable energy. It's reliable and predictable energy because it's driven by the tides and by the moon. So it is a form of energy that I will hope will be delivered in Swansea in the coming years and will certainly place Swansea amongst the world leaders in renewable energy. Okay, the report has been moved and seconded. Is there anybody else who wishes to come in and speak on this item? If not, we will go to the vote. So could I ask all those in favour of the recommendations, please to show? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. Can I just check? I know a couple of cabinet members do have clashes with meetings, so if they do have to get away, that's perfectly okay. Now I know you do have to go. Thank you both for attending for the early items. We'll move then to the next item, which is item 8, the Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Second Quarter Report, and I'll bring Mr. Smith in first on this item, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'll be brief, given I suspect attention will be very rapidly turning to next year's budget, but as you've already alluded to, there is some context and importance in the current position the Council faces. So I'll come back to the recommendations at the end for you to move, but the 5 recommendations, 4 are the same as last quarter. Number 4 is new, recognising that the flurry of nationally imposed and agreed pay awards for teachers and local government staff are now driving the as expected material overspend in the current year. So that's the recommendation 4 sets that out. If I draw your attention to table 2.3 in the Directorate summary, I draw your attention to the end column, which is the variation after COVID. As I indicated at first quarter, there was about £1 million overspend, and that would go materially higher as we then reflected the agreed pay awards being reflected in all of those service areas. So we're now in a position that all directorates, bar my own, are overspent. Mine is being used to offset the shortfall in council tax, which I will refer to in a moment, but it's in line with expectations. I should indicate that the education one, whilst not technically correct, in one sense, it's shown this way to emphasise how important the impact of unfunded pay awards is on schools. And some of that cost overspend will ultimately be met by schools' reserves as they contain their spend. So it was right for education colleagues to wish to reflect the gross spend pressure, but it will come down later on in the year. Draw your attention to 2.7, which continues our claiming from Welsh Government for COVID support. It is ongoing. We're making good inroads, but it's always a deferred and delayed reimbursement. This is likely to be the last year that this scheme will operate, and we should have less uncertainty in year on what we get back in terms of the budgeted position. As I've referenced, section 2.8 reminds and updates on what has been agreed at a national level around pay awards. And it means that there is no new money in the current year, and so the bit in bold in 2.8 indicates that schools will have to meet their own pay award excess costs in the current year from existing budgets. 2.9 reminds, and the bit in bold is particularly important, that no one is allowed to overspend, but the softening of my stance in the recommendation 4 is recognising that we are now in mid-December and the pay awards have only just gone through, and the ability to recover the position entirely is going to be really, really challenging for all colleagues. Draw your attention to the contingency fund in section 3. As was flagged in first quarter, there was plenty of spare and contingency to be made available to use to offset most of the pay pressures. Now that the pay pressures are reflected above the line, it's now being used and deployed as the contingency fund to offset the bulk of those pay pressures. Bottom of page 17 indicates that, again, our starting position is we can't understate how difficult the current context is, notwithstanding the positive comments that you've already echoed, and I would support in terms of what we've got potentially as a result of yesterday's local government settlement. We'll come back to that in due course. I draw your attention next to the overall revenue budget summary and the table on page 19, which indicates we have service overspending, which is inevitable in the current year, of around £13 million, plus council tax shortfall, which remains at a stubborn £2 million, sets out our mitigations and reduces it to a net reported second quarter overspend of just under £3 million. But in the bit bold below the table, as I've already indicated, technically, in reality, much of that will be met by schools having to make some draws from their own reserves, as we as a council are drawing from reserves to offset pressures in the current year. So I'm content that overall we are effectively balanced as an authority, despite the technical showing of it still having a balance in that table above on page 19. I've indicated we remain with a stubborn, as it were, on council tax losses in the item over the page on page 20, but council did agree my advice in terms of reducing the collection rate and resetting the tax base. So that perennial problem that we've had for 3 years, which has been reimbursed by Welsh Government, the reimbursement drops out. but we will make sure that we've set the base right so that that shouldn't reoccur. D, the next item down on that page, indicates that we will continue to have material underspends on capital financing in year. They're not reflected in the budget forecast at the moment, partly because I haven't firmed up on the exact amount, but also any underspend will flow once again, as agreed by council, into the capital equalisation reserve to offset future capital financing pressures. Section 5 summarises the capital budget, and this is the one that I've always got mixed views on, in terms of there's plenty of delivery still to do, with only 25% spent at the half-year position, but that will materially drive my underspending on capital financing, which will enable me to feed the capital equalisation reserve, as I've already indicated. Section 6 I normally skirt over very quickly, but we did draw attention to it in the first quarter, and I should again in second quarter indicate the housing revenue account, whilst normally it looks after itself, is under its own pressures in terms of rent arrears and in terms of revenue repair overspending, and because of the pay awards, the HRA employee budget will also be overspent, but a summary is set out of how the HRA will be managed in the current year. I draw your attention then to page 23 and the overall table that puts the whole lot boiled down into a single page, indicates all directorates bar my own are overspending, what arrangements we have for making central sums available to offset those pressures. At the bottom of the page, it recognising that there is still that £2 million shortfall on council tax collection, which, as I say, will drop out with the setting of next year's budget in due course. And I draw your attention only finally to the use of earmarked reserves. You can see about middle of the page there is a planned now draw from earmarked reserves of around £30 million. Now that £30 million is high, but it shouldn't be surprising. Council agreed to a £45 million economic recovery fund and was planning to spend £25 million of that anyway. I've indicated there are some overspend pressures and we will be drawing from reserves ourselves. And I've indicated that because there is no more money in the current year, schools will themselves also be drawing from reserves. That schools reserve draw will be in addition to what's shown in the table. So there will be a material draw from reserves this year. And I'm sure when the budget discussion and debate goes through Cabinet and Council in due course, there will be appropriate and judicious use and consideration of reserves in next year. That has to be set in the context of having £160 million in reserves. Clearly, in a normal year, I can't countenance £30–40 million a year coming out of reserves for very, very long. But there are real reasons and known reasons in the current year around unfunded pay awards, energy pressures, and as you rightly said, Leader, whilst there is good news in the settlement, there are also many challenges to come. So I go back to that. There are 5 recommendations and hand back to yourself if you're content to move them or ask any technical questions of me. Same 4 recommendations. That 5th one that indicates is quite late in the year for addressing the overspend pressures now, but we contain as much of the overspend pressures as possible to buy as much freedom and flexibility for Cabinet to recommend to Council a budget in due course later in the year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm very happy to move the recommendations on page 13. And just before I bring others in, just to echo what you said, I think in some respect it's a very surreal position that, given all of the pressures that we've talked about over recent months, that the actual budget is only a couple of million or so adrift at the halfway point of the year. We know that efforts are being made now to bring that back into balance towards the end of the year. But as you say, alongside that are then the planned use of both the contingency fund and earmarked reserves in order to do that. I think it should not be lost on those looking at the position across Wales. We are very well provisioned in terms of our reserves. We took decisions purposely to bolster reserves, both to support our capital aspirations, but also to make sure that we had money for when the COVID position righted itself again and we got back into normal operations. So it was the prudent decisions taken over the last couple of years that have allowed us some flexibility this year to cover some of the pressures. But overall, again, a small variance compared, I think, to many previous years, where at the midpoint of the year we may have been estimating 10 million or so adrift in terms of budgets across services. But I think, given the pressures we are facing, which we know are significant and probably unprecedented in terms of their scale, it is important that all departments continue their efforts to bring spend under control, so that we are in a best possible position going into the forthcoming year. So thank you, Mr. Smith, for that. Can I ask for somebody to second? Councillor David?
Happy to second, and I think we should thank Mr. Smith and his staff for the enormous amount of work that they put into the budget year after year, but this year in particular. So thank you. But I'd also like to thank yourself, Leader, for working with the officers and putting this money into the contingency fund. I know there were some councillors who questioned the amount of money going into the contingency fund, but it has proved to be very prudent, and congratulations all round. Difficult time, but unless that decision had been made, I think we could be in really serious problems now. So happy to second.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Francis Davis. I'd echo your thanks to Mr. Smith and his team again. They continue to do an excellent job in terms of managing what is a really challenging and volatile situation. Yes, I think the point is well made. There are a number of councils across the UK. Some have already taken very significant action in terms of their financial stability and their viability, which is not where we are in Swansea. We are in a challenging position, as all councils are, but we are not in that sort of position, and that is because of the provision and the decisions made in previous years. Mr. Smith, before I go to the vote, is there anything you wanted to add further?
Nothing I need to add, Chair, other than to thank you and Councillor Francis Davis for their kind words.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, colleagues, if there isn't any further comments, I'll ask you if you could show whether you're in agreement with the recommendations on page 13, please. Thank you, that is carried. Thank you, colleagues. We'll move then to item 9, which is the Q2 performance monitoring report. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. Just in bringing this report forward to you today, the report that sets out on page 34 sets out a performance for the second quarter of the year and meeting our council priorities as described in our corporate plan. In paragraph 2.3 shows that Q2, 14 of the 27, 51.9 compatible indicators showed improving or maintaining trends. Out of the 13 remaining compatible indicators shown on 2.4, 2 show a drop in performance directly attributed to the pandemic, and 4 show a small drop in performance within 5% of the previous results. 7 showing performance which is not directly related to the effects of the pandemic. I think what this actually proves is what we've got is the council still struggling with the effects of COVID, still in that recovery thing. And what I would do in moving this report would ask cabinet members to come in directly and contribute on their thing. So happy to move.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. I'm happy to second, and as you say, not just new measures in there, again this time, which we're unable to compare to previous years, but also a number of improvements, but a number of services where things remain challenging because of the tail end of COVID. And then, of course, our staff are working extremely hard to ensure that those services once again get back to the levels of improvement that we've seen in previous years, and we commend them for that. But it is a really challenging situation, as you've outlined, and members of the public will know how difficult and how much stress public services are under at the current time, given all of the pressures that they are facing. Okay, I will go to Councillor Smith next.
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I think what you described there, and Councillor Hopkins, is certainly the case within the Education Directorate. If you look at the performance indicators there, we have issues around attendance, which can be seen as a legacy from COVID. It's also the case that we're not alone as in Swansea in facing similar issues, and they are being addressed in the new approach you're hoping to develop to attendance and inclusion, which is a crucial part of attendance. And some of the others, of course, are less easy to define curriculum for Wales. Its implementation, the implementation and impact of ALNet and the WESP, those are ongoing issues which are less easy to define. But I think that there are important, there is evidence of important progress being made across those headings, Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Gibbard, next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, again, pay tribute to all the staff across the Social Services Directorate for continuing to develop deliver performance in spite of the ongoing challenges that we've discussed at length. So obviously there's work to do in some areas, but hopefully the report shows some very really good performance, and in spite of really difficult times.
Absolutely. Okay, I don't see any other hands. If not, the report has been moved and seconded. So can I ask all of you who wish to show your support for the recommendations on page 34 to raise your hands, please? Thank you very much. That is again carried. Sorry, my mic wasn't on. Apologies. We'll move back to item 11 then on the agenda, the Section 6 Biodiversity Monitoring Report. Councillor Hopkin.
Yeah, thanks, Leader. This gives me great pleasure to move this report. And what I would say, we've got a very good story within Swansea with our local nature partnership and our local nature team. I think the work that we've done, not just because we've had to make this Section 6 report, the work we've built on for many years, planning guidance. And, I think we're very fortunate within the city centre with our green infrastructure policy, and now working towards a county-wide green infrastructure policy just demonstrates our commitment to the natural environment and building a better Swansea. And we've got a series of SPGs within the planning department with placemaking thing and looking at building on what we've got in the area AUNB and other areas that we take great pride in. So it is, although this report is only asking us to advertise on our website and also send this report to Welsh Government, it is certainly a good news story from us in our commitment as a council to invest in our natural environment. So more than happy to move the report, Leader, and just thank everybody involved for the work that they contributed throughout. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hopkins, and very happy to second. As you say, it's a very good report, shows the strong commitment we have to biodiversity since the Section 6 post was filled some years ago. And as you say, we're making strides across a number of areas of the city to improve biodiversity. And again, thanks to you and the teams for the work that's been done. I will look for council members to second. Councillor Stevens.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I certainly echo the comments made by Councillor Hopkins and yourself. The report clearly shows that over the last 3 years that we have made considerable progress towards meeting our biodiversity duty through clear practical actions and strategically with the declaration of climate and nature emergencies. There are several really exciting initiatives highlighted within the attached report, and I certainly welcome reference to our green bus shelters. We introduced several environmentally friendly bus shelters in the city along some of our busier routes. Using native planting, these shelters will help improve air quality and provide much needed shelter in an urban environment for insects and butterflies. So I also welcome the mention on page 157 of the report of the excellent work being done in Swansea Community Farm, which is one of the only city farms in Wales. This volunteer-run farm is not only hosts a range of animals, growing spaces and a calf, but the work they are doing actually improves health and well-being, builds skills, produces local food, and cares for the natural environment. And they also manage one of our local nature reserves in Cadley Heath, which adjoins the farm. So with that, I just want to thank all involved in the report and thank Councillor Hopkins for bringing the report. So I'm more than happy to support.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Stevens, and again, thanks for the work you and your officers are doing in terms of the green infrastructure, specifically the bus shelters, but also a range of new green infrastructure and installations across the city and in our towns and villages, which will make a real difference. Okay, are there any other comments on this report? If not, let's go to the vote on the recommendation on page 129. If you could show if you're in favour, please. Thank you very much. That is again carried. On then to item 12, which is an update on the statutory compliance of the council's operational portfolio. Again, Councillor Hopkins.
I got nothing to add to the report, Leader. Just happy to move the report.
Okay, the item is for noting here, but it's a recommendation, so we need to go to the vote on it. I'm happy to second the report. Again, I have nothing specific to add to this one. So if I could ask you all to show your agreement. Thank you very much. That is carried. Move then to item 13, which is the capital programme authorisation for the commitment of funding for the rollout of universal primary free school meals. I go to Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and members will have seen earlier references to the rollout of this programme that we're now delivering for reception age children, and we are required as part of this and have been required to look at the kitchen facilities, the catering facilities across the whole of Swansea. We've identified a number of areas where those facilities need to be upgraded and improved, and I would congratulate our officers for the foresight they showed in pre-ordering some of the equipment that was needed. As it says in the report, the surveys are now complete. There are around 20 schools which are in need of further investment, and the level of investment varies, and it will enable this council to fulfil this laudable objective of universal free school meals in primary schools with an investment of nearly £5 million. So I would formally move the report, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Very happy to second this one. Again, it's very progressive and very much welcomed policy from the Welsh Government, which we are obviously helping to deliver. And it will be of benefit to measurable numbers of children in future years, because we know that the provision of free school meals helps with their learning and academic achievements. And whilst it presents us with some challenges, as you said, in terms of reconfiguration of our facilities, it is absolutely the right thing to do, and it does set us apart from the different position that you see with schools in England where this policy is not being pursued, and obviously children are not being availed of the same sorts of support. So very much welcome this, and thank you very much for bringing the report. Is there anybody else who wishes to comment on this item? If not, it's been moved and seconded. The recommendations are on page 209. So again, could I ask you to show if you're in favour of the report, please? Thank you very much. That is carried. On then to item 14, another capital report for the authorisation of commitment for capital funds awarded to support learners with additional learning needs. Back to you, Councillor Smith.
Again, Leader, this touches on something that we talked about earlier. We know the implications of the ALNet and the changes that calls for in the provision in Swansea. And I think looking at the range of projects being funded through this funding, they will all enable us to meet the needs of a growing percentage of the child population with some form of additional learning needs. I'm glad that with the range of projects that have been put forward, and they will all increase our capacity to do so within Swansea. So I would formally move the report.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Agree with all your comments there, and very, very happy to second the report. Again, another excellent investment in terms of education in Swansea. The recommendations are there on page 220. Could I ask you all to show if you're in favour, please? Thank you very much. That is carried. And then our final report for today, which is Financial Procedure Rule 7, Additional Capital Allocation to Highways Works Programme 22-23. Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Leader. I'm pleased to bring this report here today. It's a very positive report that represents a significant additional funding into our roads and infrastructure. As you will see on page 233, paragraph 1.1, we've already committed to investing nearly £3.5 million into roads and pavements in Swansea this year. And paragraph 1.2 seeks approval for an additional £5 million investment on top of the existing programme. Not only will it see investment to our highway network, but the funding will also see pavement improvements and help tackle drainage and flooding issues throughout the city. We've already got an excellent highways maintenance programme in place, which means our teams are out every week repairing roads and responding to calls from the public. And I'm confident that this extra funding will enable us to carry out even more repairs and maintenance during the next 3 years. We've already completed improvements to major routes such as Pentrygethyn Road, Cwmbwlla, Castle Street, Lycha, Pentre Road, Pontarddulais, and Colebrook Road, Grose End, just to name but a few. And there's further works at Mumbles Road, Birch Grove Road, and Carmarthen Road. I just want to pay thanks to Bob Fenwick and our entire highways team from roads, drainage and lighting for the outstanding and excellent work being done right across the city and county. So it's with that, I'm happy to move the recommendations as laid out on page 232 of the agenda and happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. I'm very happy to second the report and agree with all your comments and pay tribute to you and your teams for the work that's being done there. As you say, very good to see the extra additional money being locked in for future years. And just to be clear, this will be over and above any allocations we get from Welsh Government. So this will be a supplement direct from our reserves. As Mr. Smith said earlier, of course, there is a planned draw from reserves, and this will add to that planned draw from reserves. And that's why they're there, because we set them up in order to help us to deliver the priorities that the people of Swansea asked for, and certainly improvements to the highways, mitigating flood risk are two of the key things that came up as part of priorities for the public when we were speaking to them during the election. So very, very pleased that you brought this report, and thank you for the work that you're doing on that. So the report has been moved and seconded. The recommendations are there for the profiling of the programme over the coming years. They're laid out on page 232. So again, could I ask you all to show if you're in support of that, please? Thank you very much. That is again carried. And can I thank you all then for your attendance, colleagues, and I'll draw the meeting to a close. Thank you.